Welcome back to Iraqi Dinar News Update. I appreciate you taking the time to be here today because this discussion goes well beyond a typical currency update. What we're talking about right now is where things stand in the bigger picture, what the data and reforms are actually showing us, and why figures like 48 for the Iraqi dinar and 67 for the Vietnamese dong are being talked about so seriously across the analysis community. Before we go any further, I want to be very clear, just as I am in every video, this content is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not a financial advisor. Nothing here should be taken as advice to buy, sell, hold, or exchange any currency. My role is to share publicly available information, historical context, and analytical perspective so you can form your own conclusions. No promises, no pressure, and no sensational claims. Now, with that said, let's talk about what has actually changed in this space because something genuinely different is happening. For many years, conversations around the Iraqi dinar and Vietnamese dong were driven almost entirely by rumors. People were constantly hearing claims that something would happen over a weekend, that rates were already set, or that exchanges were imminent. Week after week, those claims failed to materialize, and over time that led to frustration, burnout, and disappointment for many long-term holders. That experience understandably created skepticism. What we're seeing now, however, is a noticeable shift away from rumor-based narratives and towards structured analysis. More people are paying attention to economic reform timelines, monetary policy behavior, banking modernization, and international compliance standards. This is exactly where figures like 48 for the Iraqi dinar and 67 for the Vietnamese dong come into the discussion, and it's important to understand what these numbers represent and what they do not represent. Starting with the Iraqi dinar, the 48 figure is not the current exchange rate, and it is not an announced rate. It is a projected valuation discussed by analysts who are examining Iraq's economic fundamentals and long-term potential. This number is derived from comparative analysis, not speculation. Analysts look at Iraq's proven oil reserves, future production capacity, foreign currency reserves, population size, debt to GDP ratio, and regional currency comparisons. When Iraq is compared to countries like Kuwait, whose currency trades above $3 per unit, it becomes clear that Iraq's current valuation does not reflect its asset base or potential output. Iraq holds larger oil reserves than Kuwait and has significantly more natural resources overall. When analysts model what Iraq's currency could theoretically support under a fully functional, diversified, and internationally integrated economy, figures like 48 are not arbitrary. They represent a conservative estimate of what the dinar might support if reforms are completed and confidence is fully restored. That said, this does not imply a sudden or instant change. One of the most important points emphasized by serious analysts is that currency revaluation is a process, not a switch. Iraq is not moving from roughly 310 dinars per dollar directly to multi-dollar levels overnight. That kind of move would destabilize markets and undermine confidence. Instead, Iraq is following a staged approach that involves regulatory reform, banking system upgrades, anti-money laundering enforcement, and gradual adjustment mechanisms. This is why the 2025 to 2026 timeframe keeps coming up in analysis. It aligns with publicly known reform schedules, not with speculation. Iraq has been working closely with international institutions, including the IMF and major financial partners, to modernize its banking infrastructure. This includes compliance with international reporting standards, electronic settlement platforms, and improved oversight mechanisms. These upgrades are not cosmetic. They are foundational requirements for any currency to function at higher valuations on the global stage. These initiatives have clear implementation timelines that extend into 2025 and 2026. At the same time, Iraq has publicly stated its intention to reduce reliance on oil revenue by expanding agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, and private sector growth. These diversification efforts are essential because a currency backed by multiple economic sectors is more stable and more credible internationally. Again, these programs are not theoretical, They are budgeted, legislated, and phased over several years, with major benchmarks scheduled in the same 2025-2026 window. Now let's shift to the Vietnamese dong because its situation is different but equally important. Vietnam has not been rebuilding from sanctions or war in the same way Iraq has. Instead, Vietnam has spent the last 2 decades steadily integrating into the global economy. It has become a major manufacturing and export hub, particularly as companies diversify supply chains away from China. Major multinational corporations operate large facilities in Vietnam, and the country continues to attract significant foreign direct investment. Vietnam has maintained consistent GDP growth in the range of 6 to 7% annually for many years. Its debt levels remain manageable, and its foreign reserves have grown substantially. Despite this, the dong remains heavily undervalued relative to Vietnam's economic output. This is not accidental. Vietnam has deliberately managed its currency to support export competitiveness. A weaker dong makes Vietnamese goods more attractive in global markets, which has helped fuel growth. However, as Vietnam's economy matures, wages rise, and production shifts toward higher value goods, pressure builds for currency appreciation. The 367 figure represents what analysts believe the dong could support if it were allowed to reflect Vietnam's true economic strength rather than being maintained at artificially low levels. As with Iraq, this would not occur suddenly. It would be a managed transition designed to avoid shocks and preserve stability. These two currencies are often discussed together because they share a key characteristic. Both are significantly undervalued relative to their fundamentals, and both are part of broader international monetary discussions. Iraq and Vietnam have both engaged with the IMF under frameworks that address currency convertibility and global integration. They are also strategically positioned in regions that are increasingly important in the evolving global economy. When analysts reference a possible coordinated adjustment or broader monetary reset, they are not describing a single dramatic event. They are referring to a gradual rebalancing of currency values as global trade, energy markets, and geopolitical relationships evolve. This is where timelines matter. The convergence of banking reform completion, trade agreement implementation, and geopolitical stabilization creates windows where currency policy adjustments become more feasible. One concept that has generated a lot of discussion recently is the idea of a managed fluctuation range, often described as a 25% band. This does not mean free, floating chaos. It refers to a controlled environment where a central bank allows a currency to move within a defined range while maintaining intervention authority. For Iraq, this is significant because it demonstrates capacity. It shows that the Central Bank of Iraq has the reserves, policy tools, and discipline needed to manage volatility. This kind of control is a prerequisite for any higher valuation. Historical examples support this approach. After the Gulf War, Kuwait's currency did not immediately return to its current level. It appreciated over time as reforms were implemented and confidence was restored. Iraq appears to be following a similar path, adapted to modern financial systems and oversight requirements. Now I want to speak directly to long-term holders who have been following this story for years. Many of you have endured repeated disappointments, missed timelines, and skepticism from people around you. That experience is real and it matters. What's important now is recognizing the difference between past narratives and present realities. The key difference today is not what individuals are claiming, but what systems are demonstrably doing. 5 or 10 years ago, Iraq's banking system was largely isolated and technologically outdated. Today, it is connected to international correspondent banking networks, operates under enhanced compliance frameworks, and uses modern settlement platforms. These changes are documented and verifiable. Vietnam's trade relationships and reserve levels have similarly strengthened in measurable ways. That doesn't mean outcomes are guaranteed. It doesn't mean timelines cannot change. What it does mean is that the discussion is now grounded in observable progress rather than speculation. Even if future valuations approach the figures being discussed, the process will involve regulations, taxation considerations, phased access, and structured exchange mechanisms. Large-scale currency adjustments are complex and carefully managed to prevent disruption. This is why it is critical to maintain realistic expectations. No one should be making life decisions based on assumed outcomes. Financial stability, mental health, and long-term planning always come first. Staying informed means watching official policy announcements, IMF reports, banking sector developments, and trade settlement trends. It also means ignoring anonymous claims, unverifiable timelines, and pressure-driven narratives. As we move closer to 2026, attention on Iraq and Vietnam will likely increase, not because of internet speculation, but because their economic trajectories are becoming increasingly relevant to global markets. That's a sign of maturation in the conversation, and ultimately, it's a positive development. I want to thank you for spending this time with me today. These topics deserve thoughtful discussion and respect for your intelligence. If you found this analysis helpful, consider supporting Iraqi Dinar News Update by subscribing and staying connected. More importantly, stay grounded, stay informed, and remember that true financial strength comes from patience, understanding, and responsible decision making. I'll see you in the next update.